because for some reason the cross itself produced the adaptation. Okay? The combination of alleles produced a species, anomalous, that does very well in deserts. It produced another mistake, produced desert Ecology, can't reproduce with anomalous, but it does very well in arid regions too. Okay? So in that case, unlike the sad lettuce, these three species have progressed here from local to regional. Right? They've done well. Right? They increased their numbers. They're now more at a metapopulation, which makes them more stable than if that type of reproduction didn't occur. Okay? All right, here's another one. This is more local to us. So we have three species in this little species triangle. This is Tragopogodon, Pratensis, Tragopogodon porifolius, and Tragopogodon dubius. Tragopogodon dubius is introduced, I think it might be invasive in the Midwest United States. But in any event, you have these three species. Pratensis, I think, is native, and all of a sudden this introduced one showed up, and now you have the two species in the same place. They're not normally in the same place, but now they're in the same place together. They both mess up meiosis to double the number of chromosomes. So through this doubling of chromosomes, we generate this new offspring, Tragopogodon macellus. Can't reproduce with either of the two parents because the chromosome numbers are off. Right? This one has twice as many chromosomes as the parents. It's now a new species. And in plants, as well as I think reptiles and amphibians do this too, when you increase the number of chromosomes, you generally end up with a more robust offspring, and that more robustness is reflected as a higher fitness. So this species has a higher fitness than either of the two parents, and it begins to outcompete the two parents. And again, this rare to begin with is quickly replaced by local dispersal and then regional. Right? The species is beginning to expand all over the planet. This one, Mirius, is produced by dubius and porifolius, produced in the same way. A mistake in chromosomes, polyploid event comes along, double the chromosomes in this F1 generation, and boom, new species, more robust, higher fitness. Okay? So just as the Helianthus examples I've shown you, we started out rare and very quickly transitioned into really common. We did that because of fitness. I do this example with you in EBE. If you remember, Spartina alterniflora is a North American species. East Coast, it's native. West Coast U.S., it's invasive. Spartina maritima is a species of Spartina in Great Britain. Let's mess up meiosis, double the chromosomes, and we end up with an offspring that's 2n of 122 with 4 copies of every chromosome. And when Spartina anglica was produced through this sympatric speciation event, because it has all these extra chromosomes, it's much more robust. It promptly took over Great Britain, made its way to Spain and Portugal, took over that area. Somebody got the bright idea of moving it to Southeast Asia for erosion control, and the next thing you know, it's all over Southeast Asia, and now it's in Australia. There's a species that was rare to begin with, and then within a few hundred years is all over the planet. Okay? Again, made that transition from rare to common very quickly. Okay? All right, now let's look at the backside of things. Let's talk about species that a long time ago were produced through a speciation event, became common, and now they're back to local. Something happened to move them from regional and global to local. some kind of ecology changed for them. These are both sequoia species. There's Sequoiadendron, that's the genus, and there's Giganteum and Sempervirens. These are the giant redwoods in California. Well, if you look on the fossil record, the redwoods were all over North America, right? You could find them in what's Iowa now, into Illinois, right? Maybe even to Pennsylvania. These things were all over the place. They were very successful gymnosperms, okay? But the planet changed on them, right? The planet went from this dryness 245 million years ago, and the planet began to get more and more wet. Well, along with this wetness, coupled with the kind of replacement of gymnosperms by the angiosperms about 65 million years ago, the distribution of the giant redwood starts to do this, right? It's all over North America, but the environment changes on them. And now these species are stuck, right? If I did a little picture of California here, they're stuck in this little region of California, which is the only place on the planet they still occur. Their distribution got shrunk down to an environment that is very similar to the environment that they're adapted to. They're not adapted to what happened out here. Other species, the flowering plants, began to do better in this type of environment. They're restricted to these things, I think they call them fog forests. They don't get a lot of rain, but they get a lot of fog. Well, these species do very well in kind of arid environments, but they need that kind of fogginess to go along with it, right? So in this case, a species with a very wide distribution millions of years ago to today, where it's just kind of sitting there waiting to die, right? There's not much you can do for it. It's not like you can say, okay, well, it's just planted everywhere else on the planet. Well, you could do that, but they're not going to make it. The particular environment that they are adapted for is restricted to a very, very small place on the planet. Okay, this is kind of like sad, right? Here's a spruce species. The Chihuahuan spruce is kind of like a little dwarf spruce. Right, the Chihuahuan spruce, again, is at the back end. It was rare to begin with, then it expanded, it became very widespread, the environment changed on them, and now they're back down to rare again. They occur over a very small part of Mexico. Right, we're talking about maybe 8,000 acres, that's about it. It's the only place you can find them on the planet, although they are popular to plant in your yard because they're dwarf spruce. But in any event, other than the greenhouse trade, these guys are very rare where they occur on the planet. Their current problem is they've gone from a population size evolutionarily that was quite large, and the population size has been dropped down to a small population. And all the things that affect that sad lettuce that have to do with being in a small population are currently affecting this spruce. Genetic drift leads to loss of alleles, which leads to natural selection not having the raw material to work with, which leads to increased problems with adaptation. This species right here is currently suffering from all of this. Right? There's just not enough genetic diversity in this population to allow for any kind of adaptation. So the expectation is if this environment where they are, where pests and pathogens change enough, boom, species is on its way out because it does not have the ability to adapt because of a lack of genetic diversity, because of genetic drift. It exists in a small population. Okay. Right. Another species here that's in the same part of this plot. It was rare, then it became common, and now it's back to rare again. It exists in one little population. And this Banksia's problem is related to being in a small population, coupled with another problem, compatibility. Many plants, like 90% of the flowering plant species that you find out there, have flowers with both male and female reproductive parts. Those would be the male anthers, the female carpel, right? And then the rest of the flower here, right? On this flower, you've got both male and female parts. Well, many species have these self-incompatibility mechanisms. Some don't, but many do. And these incompatibility mechanisms are supposed to make it so that if your own pollen falls there, this pollen will be blocked by the carpel. It will not be allowed to produce a pollen tube, and they have all these weird kind of genetic self-incompatibility mechanisms to prevent this from happening. Kind of like animals have these kind of mechanisms, like males disperse, females don't, or in human cultures, right, taboos against mating between closely related individuals. Well, plants don't have those options, but they do have these weird kind of genetic mechanisms. So this thing will be blocked and not allowed to germinate. So if my population gets small enough and individuals start to become more related to each other, maybe one individual has a really good year and now a lot of the individuals in the population are all related to each other, well, the fact that Banksia has this elaborate self-incompatibility mechanism means you don't get a lot of seed produced, because most of the seed is being blocked because of matings between closely related individuals. So now we have the typical kind of loss of alleles, decreased adaptation that we expect with small populations, but you couple it with this inability to reproduce with individuals that you're related to, and now you can't produce offspring simply because all the individuals in the population are all related to one another. Okay? All right, and then I saved kind of the best one for last. I want to talk about here first is a plant example, and then we'll move into kind of a more animal example. But this is the Catalina mahogany tree, Cirsocarpus traskiae is thought to be one of the rarest shrubs in the continental United States. Right? It grows naturally in only one gully system, right? A little gully, little kind of valley-like thing on the south side of this little tiny area. Okay? All right? Now, each summer, biologists go visit the gully to assess the health of these individuals. Only 6 of these are pure Cirsocarpus traskiae. So 6 individuals of this species, 6. And 5 are hybrids. And these hybrids are a combination of, tracheae? No, I think that's a typo. I think it's traskiae. Betuloides. Okay, so you take this species and as a parent plus this one, and you get this offspring that's a hybrid between these two. Okay? All right, they have 3 other individuals, and they don't know what those are. They can't figure it out, I guess. But this is not good, right? 6 individuals of your species, but this one over here is the one I want to talk about. This is what's called introgression. If I'm a rare species and I can hybridize with a closely related species, so let's say that's me, right? 6 individuals of Cirsocarpus traskiae. Now, there's this other species out there, Cirsocarpus betuloides beyond K, E, A, right? Got to pronounce each letter. I have all these individuals, and let's say this one's a fairly common. That's a common species. right? And it's very common. Trying to indicate this commonness by showing that there's a lot of individuals in this population. Now, this individual can reproduce with other individuals of the same species, but for whatever reason, it can produce offspring with this one. Just statistically, it's more likely that this individual reproduces with the other species than it does with its own species. And if it reproduces with the other species, it produces, let's call that the hybrid. Right? The little square equals the hybrid. And now this hybrid is going to reproduce, but it's more likely that the hybrid offspring is going to reproduce with another one of these Betuloides trees than it is with the Traskea, which means generation after generation after generation, the amount of genetic material from this original species is being reduced because it's being overwhelmed by genetic variation from the other species, right? So each generation, there's Traskea, this one reproduces with Betuloides to produce the hybrid between the two, Trask Betuloides. And then this one reproduces with another Betuloides. But now look, the amount of Betuloides genetic information is much more than what's coming from the Trask part of the cross. And if I keep doing this generation after generation after generation, this genetic material is being watered down by a preponderance of the Betuloides DNA. Okay? Those of you familiar with kind of human evolution stuff here, I grabbed this, the genetic cost of Neanderthal introgression. One of the popular models right now is that the Neanderthal died out not because of some other kind of interesting force that happened, but simply because it started to cross with Homo sapiens. But there were a lot more Homo sapiens than Neanderthals, and the Homo sapiens were a lot more successful. So each generation that this was happening,